Welcome to Beyond the B, an ongoing dialogue about the past, present, and future of the B Corp movement. Co-hosts Emmy Allison and Ryan Honeyman facilitate an open and honest conversation about the B Corp movement, advise companies on how to increase their impact, and provide a deep dive into the new B Corp standards that are shaping our community.
Hey everyone, this is Ryan Honeyman, partner at Lyft Economy, and I'm joined by my colleague and co-host, Emmy Allison. Emmy, welcome back to the show.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so it's just Emmy and I today, and a lot's happened since the last time that Emmy and I did a Mailbag episode. And so we thought we'd do a Mailbag catch-all of a bunch of stuff related to the standards updates, like the certification hub came out. Clay Brown, the co-executive lead at B Lab Global, wrote a blog post on October 1st. It has a bunch of updates. There's, random things that have happened over the past few months. And so Emmy and I thought we would jump on and do a Mailbag episode to kind of catch folks up to all the changes. Emmy, is anything coming up for you, or like where would you want to take folks on our journey?
It's kind of helpful. I always really try to help walk people through like how they get the information that B Lab dispenses. It ends up in so many different places, and like for better and for worse, it's like very comprehensive, and there needs to be some way to break it up type situation. But I lately been starting on the certification hub. The first update that can be found on the certification hub is that there is a new name for the B Corp standards, which is exciting because we are moving away, or at least folding in calling it the new standards. So what we were previously calling version 6, we're now calling version 1.6, and the new standards are being called version 2.1. I guess so. 2.0 was what was announced and launched in April, and 2.1 is what we're referring to the last updates of as of like August of this year.
True
so that's
facts.
Really helpful. Instead of being like new standards versus old standards. I love it.
And
big fan.
It is worth saying, Emmy, that you mentioned like, why is it 2.1 versus 2.0? It's because, yes, there were some new updates that we're not going to go into here because it's not a ton of stuff. It was like a couple changes to, I think it was like a climate action requirement for small companies. And then there was like some formatting of the PDFs that were changed. So there are like little tweaks around the margins that are enough that you should actually update your, like if you're using a PDF version of the standards that you downloaded from April, or if you've created a spreadsheet or something like that hasn't been updated since August, you will need to update that. But if you've just been looking at the standards in the web portal, the BIP, the B Impact platform, the B Impact, did they drop platform, or is it just B Impact now?
I'm not sure how, how like before it was the Impact app that hosted the B Impact assessment. I think the platform, I'm not 100% sure. They didn't specify in their terminology.
So if you use the B Impact platform and log in, you will not have to update anything because it will be automatically updated.
Yeah. And I recommend. I've started going through the new standards with various clients at various points of their journeys and various sizes and sectors. And every time I'm like, oh, we're just going to update. We might transition our system over our super sheet, or, launching a task manager or whatever. We're just going to take it straight out of the Impact platform. I find myself still like going between all of it. It's like B Impact platform, the PDF, the super sheet, or, Asana. And I find that I still need all of them.
Yeah, the new platform does have some added functionality that's more than version 1.6 assessment had. So like you can assign people and like you can say if it's done or not. However, the functionality doesn't like send someone an email reminder if like they have an overdue task or something, or, so you can't quite use it as an actual task manager replacement. You still have to sort of integrate it into your workflow. And so, it is what it is.
Other updates that can be found on the Certification Hub page are some new, or maybe they were already like this, but deadlines for submitting version 1.6 applications. So for new B Corps, folks need to, for new B Corps, large enterprises and multinational companies need to submit by December 2025, while standard approach companies have until the end of February 2026. And also the part where they didn't actually put dates.
Just February.
It's like a little bit.
February sometime.
It's like end of February, December. It's very un-B-Lab, but makes me nervous also. And also, I mean, there's lots of articles out there about, standard approach and multinational large enterprises and all that jazz, but just be sure that you double check those thresholds as well, because they tend to be a little bit different.
And I think it's important to note that B-Lab maybe a year ago had said companies will have until the end of 2025 to recertify on the existing version 1.6 standards. And then they changed that for existing B Corps to have to have finished by June 30th of 2025. So if you're an existing B Corp, you already missed the boat. You can't recertify on 1.6. But they had said, okay, well, new B Corps can have until the end of 2025, but they just extended that another 2 months. And the reasoning that I got from a well-placed source in B-Lab is that they are starting to allow new B Corps to certify on the new standards, version 2.1, at the beginning of March of 2026, so March 1st. And so they didn't want to have a gap between the end of December and then March when new companies could not submit for B Corp certification on either. And so I understand, it makes sense. And I have communicated to some folks at B-Lab that it is kind of frustrating to have dates changed and when people can certify and apply by. So,
yeah, it's kind of a game changer to 2 months. Like if you were to start applying for, or if you were preparing to submit your impact assessment, your new app now, 4 months versus 2 months is way different. Deeply. So it's interesting. And it's also interesting to hear too that it sounds like they're not ready to do version 2.1 to assure that or to verify it until.
Yeah. And part of that
March
reasoning
1, so.
is starting January 1, existing B Corps can apply for recertification, or I guess initial certification on the new standards version 2.1. So I think they also wanted to make sure that there was enough capacity for existing B Corps to get into the flow before the March 1st date where new companies can apply. And we'll probably touch on that soon about why it's important for a lot of existing B Corps to get going on the new standards.
Indeed. I think other interesting updates that you can find on the Certification Hub are, it's interesting because they in the Certification Hub, they link Clay's blog post. And I do think that Clay's blog post is sort of rephrasing or making clear some of the things that are in the Certification Hub. There's graphics and stuff in Clay's blog post. But before we transition to that, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, there's some interesting links to different web pages about different elements. And 2 of them are about scoping. And I always like to take the opportunity to remind folks, as this is something that I did at B Lab, and a lot of folks were surprised to know that if you have a change of control in your company, if your company is acquired, if you merge with another company, if you acquire a company, although that doesn't often affect your B Corp certification as much as if you were acquired or merged, you got to reach out to... Yes, thank you. Going public. You got to reach out to B Lab to get your new scope for certification determined. And it sounds like they published more information about scoping, which is interesting because that stuff was previously harder to find. But I think the major difference that B Lab is trying to communicate is that there's now like a sustainability management system required for companies that are like complete and distinct or have a complex structure type situation. And I don't feel particularly comfortable going into the details of that. There's a couple of knowledge-based articles about the sustainability management system, but that is a new aspect for complex structures.
And like you can't share the same executive team. Like if you have to be complete and distinct. So if companies go through the online setup process through the B Impact platform, it will actually walk you through each of those and then set your company up. So it's like, it sort of does some basic scoping for you to get going. And I think Emmy's saying it's definitely a little more, not necessarily complex, but like B Lab's created new rules to make it ideally more clear about like what is required of different companies. And so we've both had companies get excited about certification, start going down the path, do all this work, and then 6 months down the road, they're like, oh my God, we just talked to B Lab and we're like not even like legally able to certify, or we're not, it's like there's a ton of work done. And if you don't get scoping right from the start, it's a big risk for you. Which
I think is a good transition to Clay's blog post. It's like kind of buried in the certification hub. It says Clay's latest blog, and it has like a little yellow underline.
Like if I were B Lab, I would say the giant part at the bottom where it says resources supporting your certification journey, I would have a huge square that says Clay's latest blog. So we'll just give some visual feedback on like what could be improved.
The blog post itself helps to make a lot of things clear, much clearer. And I appreciate like there's some, like I said, imagery and some like charts that are particularly helpful for digesting some of these changes. They start with ECGT.
A lot of companies who are not based in Europe still sell to Europe or still touch consumers in Europe. And so ECGT, so this is about empowering consumers for the green transition. It's EU legislation designed to prevent greenwashing and help consumers make informed choices about sustainability. And it sort of does this by banning vague or misleading environmental claims, tightening rules around sustainability labels, and requiring more credible third-party verification. So part of the reasoning Europe is doing this is because of things like large companies, or I guess small companies too, creating their own little green leaf logo or something like, we're green because we have our own green leaf, and like it means nothing, but it's like an eco claim. Part of the legislation is that you have to be a third-party certification that qualifies under this new rule. You have to have certain things like, for example, third-party auditing of your standard. And so, for example, B Lab does its own auditing internally. And so version 1.6, which is the old standards, do not qualify for ECGT under this new rule. And so version 2.1 of the new B Corp standards does qualify for ECGT compliance. And so there's two steps that I think are important for B Corps to really think through whether this applies to them. Like the first step is asking, do you target EU consumers? So that could include shipping products to the EU, offering EU shipping options, prices in euros, translating your site into EU languages or using EU specific domain names like .fr, .de, .eu. If you run online ads targeted at EU geographies, if you sell through EU-based distributors like Amazon EU, etc., or have EU retail partners or brick and mortar stores. So basically, if you even like look at the European Union, if you dare glance in their direction, the second part of this is if you make environmental or sustainability claims. So terms like green, eco-friendly, sustainable, climate positive, net zero, biodegradable, 100% recyclable, or use any sustainability logos. So you have to sort of meet the requirement of like targeting EU consumers or selling in Europe, and then also making sustainability claims. It may be that this law applies to you even if you are not based in the EU. And so what you would need to do is first talk to legal counsel, because we're not attorneys, to make a determination of whether you actually fall under this rule. And then if it does apply, you would need to recertify on version 2.1 standards before September 2026. So that ensures your B Corp certification is recognized as valid under EU law. B Lab is suggesting that any company that thinks they are going to be impacted by the ECGT rules, they have to self-identify in the B Impact platform. There's like a way to do this. You log in, you go to manage account. There's a regulatory information, and you tick the box for like, we're sort of impacted by this ECGT. And then the second thing you would need to do is submit for recertification as soon as possible after January 1st, which is very soon. It's it's like 2 months. And it sounds crazy, but it's true, because you basically want to have enough time to get certified on version 2.1 before the new law takes place in September 2026.
B Lab is encouraging folks to self-identify in the B Impact platform by October 31st. I don't even think that this episode will come out until then. So I think it's just so you can be subscribed to the updates and all that jazz as much and be as updated as possible. But just an FYI, folks should probably self-identify sooner than later. Also, the B Impact platform is playing a much larger role in the certification process, which is also in Clay's blog post. He has a really cool image timeline for what the certification journey will look like with version 2.1. And I think it's helpful to know that those foundation requirements are getting sort of like looked over sooner than later. It's part of the eligibility process alongside scoping. There's like an assessment in there in the B Impact platform where it will start asking you if your company is owned by another entity or is related to other entities or has subsidiaries. And so that's really exciting because this process didn't really occur until it was a bit late for previous versions. And so a lot of times, most folks will complete these questionnaires, both for foundation requirements and for scoping, and they just get like the next steps open up automatically. But then there are some folks who will get a little notification saying, oh, your case has been submitted to B Lab, and they are reviewing the information for eligibility, and you might have to submit more information. Someone from B Lab might be reaching out to you to ask more information. This has been a slightly frustrating process in the transition from the previous process to the future process, but it is on the whole like very exciting because there were quite a few companies who were getting pretty far in the process and realizing that they weren't eligible too far into the process. But yeah, it goes register the company, foundation requirements review, scoping, and then your self-assessment. That's when you're filling out your self-assessment. Step 5 is submitting that self-assessment, and B Lab will assign an assurance provider. And then there's an audit, and then there's an audit report. So this is an interesting part of the process. Like, we have experienced there sort of being a back and forth in the verification process, where verification analysts, evaluation analysts will ask us for documentation. We submit it and they review it and they say, there's some inconsistencies here, or there's some missing information. Could you provide us more information? There's like a round of like updates, corrections type situation. And then we submit more documentation. They review again, and then they determine whether it qualifies as what they're looking for. It seems like a little bit of a similar process for the next verification process. And it's like, there's the audit, there's an audit report, and it looks like the applicant receives an audit report listing any non-conformities that the company needs to address to meet version 2.1. And then step 8, there's a space for corrective actions. There's time for the company to remedy those nonconformities or address them. It looks like major nonconformities must be addressed, while minor nonconformities can be addressed before the next audit. And then it does like specify what the difference between a minor and a major nonconformity is. A minor nonconformity is like a single observed lapse. The example is, some employees were found to not receive a living wage due to the timing of their hiring, and it was determined to be an oversight. Whereas a major nonconformity is the company is found to not have a fair wage methodology in place for any staff under the Fair Work Impact topic. So that's when the audit would be like, oh, you definitely have to fix this if you want to maintain your B Corp certification. And step 9 is issuing the certificate. This is the part, in this blog post, it says the company is certified and receives a certificate valid for 5 years, which is interesting because then it goes on to say that the company is audited throughout the certification cycle, with the frequency being determined based on the size and sector of the company. Some companies will get audited at years 0, 3, and 5. They specified here micro and small. And then they said, whereas, quote, larger companies, so they didn't really specify, are likely to be audited annually. So this is an interesting development in the process.
I do think it's worth just mentioning the terminology even of audit. So B Lab's been very careful for the last 18 years of not using the term audit. They use review because they don't want it to seem like a tax audit or financial audit. But I imagine B Lab is using this term audit because it's like a ECGT requirement and or it just makes more sense to have a third party auditor. And so it just adds some credibility.
Yeah. The term nonconformity, I was like, wow, those are really some ISO, very technical words. I will say that reading through this, like in more detail, I took some time to mourn the version of the B Corp standards that it has been more flexible and it has had the ability to be more innovative up until now. And I think, it's for better and for worse. I think that the new standards are definitely moving us in the right direction for getting capitalism to better prioritize people and planet. But the previous B Corp standards really allowed for approaching social and environmental impact very creatively. And we're now seeing an extreme standardization of this process. And where we get to use terms like audit and nonconformity And it's definitely in service of a large point of the transition is this being more clear. And the point of B Corp certification is just like less open to interpretation and means the same thing to lots of different people. But yeah, going through all of these terms in the transition, I definitely have been feeling like a sort of heaviness this year, having like attempted to actually implement and apply them, because I think previously companies could really add their own flair.
Yeah. The good old choose your own adventure sword that cuts both ways, right?
Indeed, exactly. Yeah, I think some folks were kind of skating on through, whereas others were really going above and beyond. And now we have a sort of a more average through line.
You know, some other things that stand out to me is assurance. So they say assurance providers, plural. So I think for a while I was under the assumption, perhaps mistakenly, that there would be one assurance provider that is the one that works with B Corps, but it's pretty clear that B Lab is using plural. It says assurance providers are independent B Lab approved third parties that undertake the audits. And so by the time this podcast comes out, we may already have an announcement of who that is, but as recording in mid-October, we don't yet have that. Some other things that stand out are, I feel like B Lab, they definitely paused on-site audits during COVID. But when you were there, Emmy, had they resumed on-site audits, or was it still all virtual? Like I feel like it's been virtual since COVID. Like I haven't heard of any company having an on-site audit in the last few years.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think there was one point where they were translating a site review to just be more rigorous. Yeah, I don't know who has had.
Yeah, maybe large,
site review
like maybe like
in the
large
last 5 years.
multinationals. Like I bet you Nespresso or others have had on-site audits just because they're in New York, I think, and there'd be labs there. So it's also just budget and stuff like that.
I mean, B Lab, it's like how B Lab defines risk. It's like the larger the company, the risk just increases it correlates quite directly.
And so they're talking a lot about auditing, but then they say an audit itself is time-bound, taking between 1 and 10 days, depending on the size of the company. That's like a huge shift from the current version, which is like this sort of open-ended, I don't really know. It could take a week, it could take 6 months. That's currently like the review process. But B Lab is saying from submission to certification, it will take 2 to 6 months, mainly depending on the number of major nonconformities. So that's definitely a faster process than it's been.
Yeah, I do think it will get faster over time, but I am quite curious to see in the early days, I would imagine would be longer. But yeah, I think too, they have emphasized a little bit like scheduling, which to me signifies that there will be an audit that is active for 1 to 10 days, but like everybody has all their ducks in a row type situation. Like there's enough advance notice to get the right paperwork together and the expectations are managed so that it can be a more streamlined process.
Yeah. And we kind of buried the lead a little bit here, but B Lab is talking about 5-year certification cycles, which kind of breaks my brain a little bit because it's still talking about having audits at like year 0, years 3, year 5 for, say, micro and small companies. But then larger companies will be audited annually. So every year, I guess. But then, like, what does that actually mean? What is a year 3 audit versus a year 5 certification versus a year 0? Tell us, Emmy, what's the answer to this? Sorry, I know you don't know either. This is a mailbag, right?
I know
But you just can't tell.
the answers.
It's embargoed.
They're all inside my brain. Right, exactly. The year. Also, I do just want to. We've talked about this, I think, before in the podcast, but there are some requirements in there in the standards that are requiring that folks report on the year before year zero. And I just want to tell people to watch out for those. There are some stuff that you actually probably should be doing actively now this year, fiscal year 2025, to prepare for your cert, even if it is like 2027. But yeah, I'm also still a bit confused about this audit cycle and schedule, and I'm hoping they share more in their assurance model rollout.
I for folks who are listening, I did have a conversation with Clay Brown, who wrote this blog and is the co-lead executive at B Lab, about some of this stuff, and he was saying it is challenging from B Lab comms perspective, because if he says a lot of things and lays it all out, people get really confused and have a lot of questions. But then he was saying, like, if he only writes a little bit and like gives a little bit, people are like, where's all the information? And so it's like kind of like a lose-lose type situation. So we know B Lab is trying, and they're muddling through. They've got, I think, like, many listeners may or may not know, that's worth mentioning, that B Lab itself on a global level is like reorganizing into a unified entity. Whereas before it was a set of independently operating global partners with a global like head. And so B Lab has actually since April voted in an entirely new board of directors that is not the same board of directors that were there before. Andrew Kassoy passed, I think, around April, May, it was like sort of beginning of summer. And he was the co-chair of the board. And so one of the founders has passed, the entire board of directors has turned over. A new board of directors is in place, but I'm not sure is like fully like operating yet. And the entire sort of B Lab global network is completely changing structure of like who is reporting to who, and how do we make decisions now as this more unified global entity, as opposed to the sort of very independently customized operating groups that it was set up before, in addition to trying to like roll out this whole new standard. And so I think it's just important for folks to know that there's just like B Lab it's definitely trending in a good direction from the time we started this podcast now a year and a half ago, which is crazy, Emmy, to think about that.
That is wild.
Yeah.
Wow.
A lot has shifted in a positive way, but it's just also still a lot of change.
It is for everyone. Yeah. Across the movement. It's interesting. I think about like what it's like to enter the movement as a new B Corp right now. I'm just like, well, as my level clients, they get a little extra like inside scoop and some context. What most folks are just like kind of walking in and being like, I like it here. Oh, it's changing quite quickly. I do just want to say that, yeah, this is a lot of change. And part of me is like, when I go through these new standards and all of these different ways of going about it and a whole different framework and structure and all that jazz, I get quite overwhelmed still. The version 2s have been available since April. And I really thought that I was going to be like hitting the ground running by now. And to folks out there who are just like still muddling through or haven't even started, it is a daunting an intimidating process, and I really hope people give themselves grace. I think there's like so much learning to be had when you give yourself like time and space, if you have the luxury and your research date is a little bit further off, to look at the standards, walk away, come back, check out these updates on the certification hub, walk away, come back. It's quite overwhelming. I still can't quite figure out if it's like more stressful for like B consultants who can sort of, we have a bit of a crystal ball type situation and can see how applying these standards across different size companies, across different sectors and across different industries is going to be challenging. Feasible, but challenging. But I also really feel for folks who are working to apply these standards to their own company and just like facing the very like long road of coming up with all of these new public disclosures and a climate action plan for the first time. And I just want to let folks know that we're all in this together, all that jazz. And I do think that especially B Lab US and Canada, I can't speak to other global partners, has been really attempting to, they're using this term upskilling, spend a lot of time and energy ensuring that folks have the right resources to help them fulfill these requirements. But it can be quite overwhelming. And I just want to say that we're here in the trenches with you. And, we do this because, again, for people and planet and for each other. But it is difficult.
Yes.
And I appreciate
great
you.
point, Emmy. Super appreciate the focus on like how hard this is, because Emmy and I do this every day and it's still mind-boggling to keep our head around everything, partly to all the change. And so
it's difficult. It's like I said, I thought I would be like good with it by now. And it's like I've only had this for 6 months now. But it becomes more and more a part of my everyday. And I am excited about the new standards, but I am also frustrated on the daily.
I think I did a podcast interview with Adam Garfunkel and Mike Rowlands from Junction Strategy that came out recently, and they helped a lot with just these new standards are more aligned with systems change and, like moving the whole community and our system forward, as opposed to version 1.6, which was a lot more about how do I just individually be a good business, a good company. Yes, there was like a movement component, but I think the new standards really like try to take that to the next level, which I think is cool. So I would also say that even though Emmy and I find this hard to wrap our head around and mind-boggling, we're still committed to it and we still get excited about the possibilities, and any criticism is couched with a big grain of salt of like friendly feedback, but ultimately we're big believers in the movement.
My constructive criticism is deeply steeped in love and like just this vision of what we can do with a framework like this. And it's exciting, and it's still the best tool that we have to help for-profit entities, again, better prioritize people and planet. And I really do think it's worth it. I'm obviously biased, but I do think it's worth this extra effort. And it's easy to get, I think bogged down by all these details. What is the assurance model going to look like? But I think in 5 years, I'm just like really excited to see where we're at. We have some really cool metrics and data about the movement as a whole, and some really cool partnerships, and really amazing like groups of people doing really amazing like and effective collective action. I think it's going to be quite a fun ride. now that it's finally here.
Well, one other thing I want to just plug for folks who are listening is we've been working on a tool at Lyft Economy called the B Corp Values Embodiment Assessment Tool. And the quick pitch about why this tool might be useful for you is it's free, but it comes from this thing around if you see two different B Corps, they might have the same score, on the old version of the standards. You might say both companies have 100 points and they're both maybe even the same industry, but one company really embodies the values and you get this sense that they really ooze the vibe of B Corp and purpose and mission. Whereas another company that has the same score and the same industry doesn't. And so my question has been something we're looking at Lyft is why is that? And we created a tool called the B Corp Values Embodiment Assessment. And it's basically a free way that any B Corp can assess themselves across these 10 dimensions of embodiment, from things like leadership commitment to strategic integration of your purpose into the strategic goals of the company, values aligned job roles, things like impact measurement and transparency. There's also equitable governance, celebration, and celebration and public displays of commitment to the values. And then finally, there's systems change orientation. And so we've taken it at Lyft Economy, and it's interesting. We scored, it's a scored assessment to get us, B Corps do a score every once in a while. And we scored, I think, 104 out of 150 points. And we were joking that we're moderately aligned at Lyft Economy with the B Corp values. And so, we encourage companies to check it out. It's a pretty cool tool. And I will drop a link to this tool in the show notes and the podcast. Yeah, the notes for this episode. So folks can check it out.
Yeah, before we fully wrap, if folks listening have any thoughts or feelings that they would like to share about the updates that we shared today, or just in general, the new standards, please feel free to email us at beyond@lyfteconomy.com. There is a world where we're going to do another technical mailbag episode, and we love when folks send in questions or just general thoughts that we can discuss on the podcast. But we would love to hear what y'all think about these updates.
Well, appreciate you all for being listeners, making it all the way to the end. And we'll see you next time around. Thanks, Emmy.
See you next time.
Hey, Beyond the Bee listeners. If you're looking for even more inspiring conversations with leaders on the front lines of our movement towards just futures, be sure to subscribe to Next Economy Now, produced by the team at Lyft Economy. Next Economy Now broadens the focus beyond the B Corp movement to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, democratic, equitable, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy. Check out our latest episodes at lyfteconomy.com/podcast. You can subscribe to Next Economy Now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.